Welcome, everyone. My name is Kim Marie from the Evolutionary Astrology Network. And as you can see on your screen, we're going to talk about a subject you may not have heard about yet. Uranus, Bi-Septile, Pluto. And as you can see on your screen, it says part 1. So we'll see what we get through today in regards to material. I'd like to give you some background on this biseptile aspect and perhaps touch base on a few of the collective themes we'll be working with through that. First of all, though, by what? It is a septile, and the septiles are the harmonics of the number 7. And this means what we're doing is we're dividing the circle into 7 pie-shaped segments. As you can see down in the lower right hand of your screen, this is what it looks like from the perspective of the circle. And what happens is that creates aspects that we call the septile, the biseptile, and the triseptile. So let me show you what this looks like from the perspective of the cycle of phases and aspects. As you can see on your screen, whenever you divide that circle up into 2, 3, 4, any of the numbers, the 0 degrees always counts as one of those aspects. And so if you look at your screen there and move in a counterclockwise direction, you can see this, the septile, the biseptile, the triseptile, waxing and waning, going around the circle. Now, let's look at this from the perspective of Uranus-Pluto. And what you are seeing on your screen is anytime you compare two planets to each other to figure out their aspect, and you work with the 360-degree of the cycle of phases and aspects, you always compare faster moving planet to slower moving planet. So Pluto moves slower than Uranus. So we put Pluto at the 0 degree mark, and we have to go approximately 100 and 102 degrees counterclockwise, where we get to where Uranus is from the perspective of Pluto out there in the heavens right now. Perhaps you heard or have been aware that from 2012 to 2015, they made 7 first quarter squares. Astrologers talked a lot about that because if you look at that inner wheel of that cycle of phases and aspects, you'll see that these phases go yang, yin, yang, yin. Yang, energy moving out from the center, yin, energy moving back to the center. So when we have those first quarter squares, we went into the first quarter phase. The phase is known as the crises in action, and it created all this energy that wanted to come out and express itself. Well, guess what? There's another aspect beyond the squares, and it is called the biseptile. And as you can see down there on your screen, I've circled it in red. We are going to have 7 of those aspects between 2018 and 2021. Let me show you the dates and degrees of those aspects, and you'll have this to refer to as a recording afterwards when you want to look at that. But you can see on the screen here, the very first one is going to be coming up here on July 26th. Every single one of these biseptiles will take place with Uranus in early degrees Taurus up into its first third through the sign. Pluto, of course, is going to be finishing up there in Capricorn. Now, what I would like to just say to you is that these biseptile aspects will be just as strong, just as important, just as valuable as the first quarter squares were, and especially on a collective level. They will be happening for all of us individually as well, and as I say things today, you can work with your own chart if you know where Uranus and Pluto are transiting, and see if you can pick up on things from an individual perspective. But we're going to start this conversation out, part 1, more from collective perspective, all right? And so, remember that July 26th. I'll show you some slides on that coming up here just a little bit in regards to impacts with some other charts. But let's go into what is the definition of a biseptile. As we said earlier, it's in the first quarter phase, which is between 90 and 135 degrees. However, let's back up. All of those septiles, regular, bi, tri, septile, they all bring what EA, or evolutionary astrology, calls a sense of special destiny, and either aligning with our necessary path of evolution, for instance, in the first septile, or a realignment with the biseptiles, triseptiles as we go around the circle. They will also work in this particular case, going from first quarter squares to the biseptile. That will also work with realigning anything from those first quarter squares that may have gotten off its path of evolution. Think of how the 2016 US presidential election went, and think of some of the laws and policies that the United States has put in place since then. Many of us might feel that these policies and laws may be moving us socially backwards rather than more towards what evolutionary astrology would consider natural law, natural spiritual principles. So these septiles give us that ability to, again, realign on our path. Now, a septile is always going to also relate, first quarter phase. The biseptile is a new form and purpose. Again, first quarter squares, first quarter phase, crises in action. We've got to bring whatever is wanting to evolve between any two planets outward, yang energy, into manifestation. So that's why we're creating these new forms and a new purpose. And so as we get to that biseptile, it's going to start to become very individualized to us, individually and collectively. So when I say highly individualized nature on a collective level, it means one country may be experiencing these aspects different than, say, the United States. I live in the United States, so I thank all of you for allowing me to give a U.S. perspective. Those of you internationally, perhaps you know things that are going on in your countries on a political level, a climate change level, a social activism level in some degree, where you can recognize as we move through these slides, oh, that's how it's taking place in our country as we're moving forward here in the rest of this decade and into the next decade. So again, there's a need to bring out whatever we feel is a special destiny to this form that we want to manifest. And I'll get into Uranus and Pluto and what those forms are like. There's this sense that we've got to get it out there and we've got to manifest it. We've got to do it. We've got to be it. We've got to create it. And we want it to reflect where we're going as an individual, if it's an individual perspective, and we want it to reflect where our particular culture, society, or country are going from wherever our collective conscious perspective is at. More on that. Now, it has an identity to what happened at the first septile at 51 degrees, but we're not going to take time with that right now. Maybe we will in part 2 or later on as we watch these biseptile aspects come through over the next few years. Now, this key word of special destiny, this sense that there's something to do and create, what it will also do is it will bring into our life on an individual and a collective level those events that will appear as fated circumstances. In other words, if we have gotten off our path, the biseptile all of the septiles will work to realign us with whatever we perceive to be our necessary path. Excuse me, I'm going to take some water. Thank you for letting me do that. And so remember these two words that or two key phrases that I have in blue on the screens here. All of the septiles will give a sense of a special destiny that we have to fulfill. And they will also bring to us what appears to be fated events and circumstances that will align us on whatever our necessary path of evolution is. Now, as we move into Uranus and Pluto, and by the way, anytime you have questions, I don't mind. You can ask, and yes, I'm happy to answer questions afterward for whatever extent of time we have. I just want to point out something with Uranus and Pluto on a very generic level that you can see on your screens. They naturally square each other here. As you can see, Pluto rules Scorpio, 8th house, Uranus rules Aquarius in the 11th, and they make this natural square. And so there's just a natural tension that can exist between these two archetypes. Uranus, that word for freedom. Pluto, that word for security. And you can see where those come from as you look at the polarities, modalities, and elements here between these two planets and what they represent as archetypes. So briefly, they have a 127-year cycle together, and Pluto represents the soul and its dual desire nature. And that dual desire nature is the separating and returning desires. And as I have a tendency to explain it, separating desires are anything and everything. A new lover, a new job, a new car, a new purse, a new house, whatever it is. Returning desires, basically I look at that as being one desire. The desire to know that from which we came, or the desire to know universal source, the desire to return to universal source. Now, most of us, as we're going through these different evolutionary states of consciousness, consensus, individuating, spirituating, we have both of these dual desires operating within us at all times. Consensus will have a tendency to just keep repeating it with more separating desires. As we learn to expand consciousness into individuating, spirituating, we start to have that returning desire become more and more and more conscious. Now, from the perspective of evolutionary astrology and natural law, it is natural to exhaust the separating desires. If we could just pray ourselves perfect, we'd all have instant nirvana. As you can see, many of us can't quite snap our fingers and just be there in the blink of an eye. We go through these countless lifetimes, living experiences and exhausting these separating desires. So we're naturally going to do it that way, whether we've been conditioned by consensus to do it differently, pray ourselves perfect, or not. Uranus represents the individuated unconsciousness, or what is unconscious within our soul on an individual level. And that individuated unconsciousness contains the past of each and every lifetime, including this one. It contains everything that we want to suppress in the present moment. We don't want to deal with it. We don't want to look at it. I'm going to just pretend this isn't happening in my life. And it also contains the future. And what we call those blueprints, or the glimpses that we get of where our own soul is wanting to move forward on an individual level. This works on a collective level as well. Everything we say on these screens, you can apply it individually, you can apply it collectively to groups of people. So when we look at Uranus-Pluto as a planetary pair and their cycle together, we're looking at the soul and its individuated unconsciousness. And the intent of the cycle between these two, Uranus and Pluto, is to decondition ourselves from the past, to liberate ourselves in the present moment and to evolve ourselves into the future of our own soul. Now, we'll do this individually. We'll do this collectively as groups of people. We will even do this globally as a human species as well. Now, I'd like to also, though, point out that both Uranus and Pluto will represent revolutionary cycles. If you've been studying astrology for any length of time, you almost all know these are the true upsetters of the zodiac. They don't do things like Neptune and just dissolve it into nothingness. No, they come with a pop and a bang, and how big does it have to be to get your attention? So a key word in EA for Uranus is transformation, where something unfolds step by step by step. A quick example of that would be look at the LBGT movement, as we've had Uranus in Aries for the last 7 years. It moved things wide open, and it really created that step-by-step change in some cultures of people going from being, very judgmental of the LBGT issues to being more accepting of them. Pluto is a key word that we use with metamorphosis. And this is where something actually goes through death and rebirth process. Jeffrey Green's example was always the butterfly, where it would go from the cocoon and really come back out or crystallize and come back out as the butterfly. There was the symbolic death and rebirth because it was more than just a step-by-step transformation. It was a huge shift that took place. However, together, these two planets are going to represent all of what I call the famous upsets, the traumas, the rug pulled out underneath us, to use Uranus and Pluto words respectively. Now, remember we said Uranus represented freedom in broad terms, Pluto represented security in broad terms. Well, whenever they have aspects with each other and create any of those famous upsets, it will create choice points for us. We can cling to the past. I don't want to change. It makes me feel insecure. And if we cling to that past, we will have a tendency to repeat things in ever increasing intensity if we are refusing to evolve or change. Anybody notice this happening through Pluto and Capricorn over the last 10 years? Anybody notice the powers that be and the plutocrats? They do not want to look at the changes happening. They want to hold on to that past, that power, that control as best as they can. We can also jump into the future and just totally go for it until insecurity slows us down. Hey, this is pretty exciting, but all of a sudden, I don't know where I'm at or where I'm going. I think I need to just stay still or slow down for a moment and feel secure again. This just happens to be Uranus in Aries tendency, although it's not a total 100% thing. But Uranus in Aries has really broke a lot of things free and moved us forward, not just in technology, but in some collective social cycles as well. And then the third choice is that we vacillate between that past and future in the present moment, what we would call 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And just look out there at any societal trend or issue that you're interested in and look at how from one group of people to another, from one country to another, some areas people are moving forward, other areas people tend to be moving backwards. An example of this is in the U.S. We have had a lot of state legislative bills turn into laws that are really trying to take away a woman's right to choose whether or not she has an abortion. And we compare that to Ireland, that just had a total change to one of the amendments in their constitution, and 2-1 people said women could have the right to choose to have an abortion. Up until that point in Ireland, you had to travel out of the country to choose to freely have an abortion as a female. Now, these three choices can all mix things up together, and it can create that what we call that uniform evolution, which is again day by day, year by year, step by step, and it can create those famous cataclysmic revolutions that Uranus and Pluto do. It's always up to the free choice of individuals on an individual basis, up to the largest consensus in any group of people. Sometimes we can even de-evolve. We're not guaranteed of evolution 100% of the time. In the big broad scheme of things, yes. But have you ever watched a society create some freedoms and then lose them? It happens. Let's see, hopefully, maybe it won't happen in the US. So remember, that septile was a sense of special destiny that we wanted to create, and in first quarter phase that we really want to manifest, and it will appear to come at us through fated events that are really just trying to help us realign with evolution. So Biseptile specifically is going to bring that potential to realign on an evolutionary path, but it does not guarantee it. The degree of realignment will be dependent upon the degree of involvement, the choices you make individually, and the choices that various groups of people will make on a collective level. So, what is necessary to break free from the past in order to find the courage in the present to move forward into a new future? That is the big opportunity here with Uranus, Bi-Septile, Pluto, and it's specifically a question mark, because if there is anything that you take from this hour of conversation, it is still about how active you choose to be in what you want to see manifest on planet Earth. Again, Uranus, Pluto, and the collective. So here's one of the areas where I see the most hope, and I've said this for years. It is the youth, because the Pluto Virgos, Libras, Scorpios, and I think we could include the Pluto and Sagittarius generation. These young bloods, as I call them, they're other-orientated. Virgo is that shift into the second half of the zodiac. The Libras and the Scorpios, they're the two relationship signs of the zodiac. You extrapolate that out into the collective, they're orientated to the other, which is a big shift from the Pluto and Leo generation. And I mean, no offense whatsoever, Leos, no offense whatsoever. But looking at it from that collective level, these, I've been waiting for the youth to show up. And so if we look at, from the U.S. perspective, what happened in Parkland, Florida, back in February, where a student went in with a gun or big guns, and, several died. We all saw the activism that came out of that. So the question is, how will it spark? Will the spark turn into a flame? Will it create a fire? So this is from a website that does research for nonprofits, nonprofit technology for the good of humankind. The young adults. They donate time, they donate money, they participate in rallies or meetings, they participate in fundraising activities, they boycott or support businesses, they participate through mobile texting, they subscribe to online news and feeds, they lead or organize group events, they write, email, or call their representatives. There was an Associated Press article today that since the Parkland, Florida shooting, polling young adults, and I don't remember what the age group was, but let's just call it these, Pluto in Scorpio and Libras, the ones that have that right to vote or are just coming upon that. Since February, those young adults who feel that they can make an effect and change government has went from 37% to 47% of that age group in the United States. So just that statistic right there shows us how these young ones are coming out, and they're going to be a part of these Uranus, Biseptile, Pluto aspects and say, wait a minute, if we want gun control, we're the ones that are going to have to wake up and do something about it. We're going to have to become active. If we want a climate that we can actually survive and live in over the next 50 to 100 years, we're going to have to be the ones that do something about it. So while this screen says social activism, don't limit it to just gun control or climate change. These young ones are on the leading edge of the whole diversity movement when it comes to the color of your skin or your sexual orientation and the freedom to do what you want with your body and how you choose to relate to another soul on planet Earth. You can start to just extrapolate all kinds of issues into the youth showing up and being a part of this biseptile movement, as I'm going to call it, through these aspects. Another area, it happens to me be my pet project, which is sharing, giving, and including, or through public banking, let's say it that way. And so what we have going on and what we've seen with some backlash here throughout these Uranus-Pluto squares, through how the presidential election went in the U.S., even backlash to electing our first Black president in the United States. The consensus state of consciousness, the approximately 7 out of 10 souls on planet Earth, any race, any country, is very Saturnian. And so they are afraid of these societal changes. And there's a big pushback from these Uranus-Pluto squares. So recognize in that 10 degrees leading up to the 90-degree first quarter square and the 10 degrees beyond it, that 20 degrees of the zodiac, that is that crises in action. Its polarity is the last quarter, which is disseminating phase society and the crises in consciousness. Oh my gosh, what are we doing? Change is happening too fast. I don't think I can handle this. And with Pluto going through Capricorn right now, it has added on to this pendulum swing towards conservatism and trying to have us go backwards socially, especially from evolutionary astrology's perspective. And so there is, remember those 3 choices? There's this huge desire to try and cling to the past and tradition and yesterday. And where do we see it happening? Basically with economic unrest. And it's been exploited as racial unrest and immigration issues. Illegal immigrants coming into the country and taking our jobs. 30% of food production in the United States, The labor is done by illegal workers because Americans won't do it. And if we continue to have the ICE picking up illegal immigrants and deporting them, rather than giving workers who've been here, years or decades, a chance to citizenship to really do the work. And I'm from a farming background, so I'm quite familiar with the labor involved with, producing food. Saturn and Uranus and Taurus is with this as well. And so this wealth inequality is being exploited in so many ways. I could talk for 3 hours on it. I better move on. Technology is going to continue to evolve the jobs and our careers by automating things and, taking jobs from humans and giving them to robots. And what it's going to do is have this effect of reducing income for the masses. There are going to be fewer and fewer jobs with more and more people wanting them. And now that Saturn is in Capricorn, it's emphasizing it even more. And what's really going on is the wealth inequality. There's plenty of money to go around. It's just not being more equitable distribution. And so, will we have realignments of this with Uranus, Biseptile, Pluto? I have my fingers crossed. I am on my soapbox. I am energizing this just as much as I can through the public banking movement. More information, you see the site on the bottom of your screen. Go there. I don't care what country you live in, because they're the BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. They have more public banking than we do in the United States. We have almost none, other than the state of North Dakota with its Bank of North Dakota. What could happen and start to gain momentum with Uranus, Biseptile, Pluto is this concept that's called universal basic income. Another way that it's looked at is a guaranteed job for everyone. But with the universal basic income, it's that instead of this ridiculous amount of wealth, 3 people in the U.S. have as much wealth as the bottom half of U.S. citizens. 8 people in the world have as much wealth as the bottom 3.5 billion inhabitants of humans on planet Earth. Instead of that ridiculous extreme, as we start to have more equitable distribution of wealth, we can more than pay for a UBI. And through the public banking movement, it is the way to create the funding for that, as well as the funding of taking care of the children and the elderly and giving more and more education to the youth and rebuilding the infrastructure, Pluto and Capricorn. I don't think I put this in there, but if you go and research my name on YouTube, I did a Populist Banking Revolution webinar, and it's free. And you can go get more information on how we create money and how we can make these changes. I sincerely hope that we are going to see these biseptile aspects create what religion would call the debt jubilees, which would, have a wiping out of debt and more equitable distribution of resources. So Uranus and Taurus is also going to be a part of jump-starting this. So I just want to briefly mention this, because as we have this shift of Uranus from Aries to Taurus, Uranus shakes everything up. And in Taurus, it's not going to be a big bang like it was in Aries. Uranus ran into Aries, and we had the Fukushima earthquake, and that, I call it Fukushima earthquake, the nuclear meltdown, and all of a sudden, boom, it happened, and it was, and we're still dealing with it. Uranus in Taurus is Kilauea volcano. slow, steady, drip, drip. Every once in a while, Uranus spikes a big change, a big change. We can see that happen in the financial markets with Taurus and resources. We can see it with not having enough food, with what we are talking about with just the labor to produce the food, not to mention what climate change will also do. So just briefly, some of these Taurian themes that are going to be shook up by Uranus and Taurus and will be part of this realignment with the biseptile aspects. Security issues are still going to get shook up. Pluto in Capricorn really wants to be secure with its resources and hoard. Uranus in Taurus could hoard. Depends on what the masses decide. And when we feel insecure, because Taurus is all about inner security, so Uranus is going to shake up all those inner securities and the outer securities. And when it shakes up that inner security, it's like, oh, I don't want to move. I don't want to change. I don't think I can be a part of this. There may be things that come along on a collective level that are way beyond anything we could organize as citizens. Yet those of us who are aware of the direction that change has to come in the inclusive world, giving, sharing, and including, we can then be a part of the shakeup and move beyond the inertias. There will literally be die-offs of species. There will be physical and biological survival issues of all kinds of species. And one of the ways that we are seeing that come to a head is the whole gun violence. I don't have to probably go into statistics for you in the amount of gun violence we have in the United States compared to, say, Japan, which is one of the safest countries in the world. Ridiculous. But these ideas will become more and more into our consciousness with Uranus in Taurus. There's going to be the relationship we have within ourselves, and there's going to be the relationship we have with others, the Scorpio polarity, and our environment. Taurus, physical earth. And this will include more sexuality scandals, and it will include more activism in that way, hopefully to move us towards more and more equality with the genders. That could be one of the most beautiful realignments we could have with Uranus, Biseptile, Pluto. Could we please have a little more equality between men and women on planet Earth? Those of you on an international level, there is a progressive group, although it's not progressive enough for some people. It's called Emily's List. They train women to run for office, and they typically will have somewhere around 500 to 600 women approach him during a year for information or even training on how to run as a candidate, how to speak, how to fundraise. After 2016, in the year 2017, Emily's List had 20,000 women contact them. There are more women running locally, regionally, and nationally in the U.S. than we have perhaps ever seen. Let's see where that goes through these biseptile aspects. And again, I already talked about that relationship with resources and money, and that physical world in general, food, clothing, shelter, etc. I think Uranus and Taurus will bring financial upsets. My husband works with me in evolutionary astrology, and we're continually talking back and forth. Will we see this as Uranus just busted into Taurus, or will we see, he thinks he has a background in finance and business and was a stockbroker. He thinks we'll see some downturns, but if you've been paying attention, they're just gutting the laws we put in place in the U.S. from 2008. And I have a tendency, and I think we're both starting to lean, that we're going to see Uranus go back into Aries with its retrograde. It'll be a year from now when Uranus goes into Taurus the second time that we might see some of the real financial upsets again. Stay tuned. I could be wrong. Who knows? I don't like the word prediction. But Uranus in Taurus is going to continue to have our value systems evolve, shift, expand in all kinds of ways. We're going to do it inwardly and we're going to do it outwardly. We're going to do it as an individual. We're going to do it collectively. And as we look at Uranus in Taurus, over the next 7 years, who knows how it will expand value systems, and especially as these young ones come up that are so much more liberal orientated than perhaps us more experienced souls are in chronological years, let's say it that way. The Biseptiles is going to help really reshift, really realign value systems, as well with everything that is taking place in the world right now. Just again, look at the last 5-10 years and how we've shifted with same-sex marriage, or how we've shifted with the legalization of cannabis, which, by the way, might be one of the ways in which we lead that public banking movement, because in the U.S., the states that have legalized cannabis, whether medically or recreationally, they have nowhere to park their money. And so those states that have legalized it on a recreational way, they're the ones that are really starting to investigate public banking and to shift the conversation. So another example of those values just really starting to evolve. Climate change, probably for those of you who listen or are watching, this webinar now or in the future, we're preaching to the choir. But Uranus in Taurus will force green energy changes just through the natural weather events that are going to happen. They are now saying that hurricanes are expected to get stronger. They are going to be wetter, which means there's going to be more moisture, and they're going to move slower, which means they're going to cause more damage. They're not just going to zip through, they're just going to stall and, create more and more havoc. And I already talked a little bit about the fact that some of these, Earth events related to climate change are really going to disrupt food distribution. Something that I've not talked about, that I don't have a slide on, which is popping in, is our current administration. Donald Trump is, playing with tariffs with what we call our allies, like the European Union, or what we call those that, we compete with. And so they just, release these tariffs on steel and aluminum with Europe. And they're saying, oh, it's just fractions of a penny on that can of pop or that can of beer that you drink. Well, the other side of the story, specifically to the United States, is that we grow less and less and less food here. I'm from the bread belt. I'm from the soybeans, wheat, and corn area of the country. And it is really shaking things up with all the Trump voters here. Well, I'm still with them. I still supported them. But boy, is there a lot of conversation going on. And sometimes I have to keep my mouth shut. However, because we import in the U.S. so much food, they're talking with just these tariffs that have been implemented in the last couple of days, how it will raise the price of all kinds of food, the stuff that you are used to buying. And it's, who knows how it will escalate. Uranus and Taurus. So Uranus Biseptile Pluto, will it have us really shifting those values towards climate change? Will it shift our understanding of it? Will it have us recognize, wait a minute, we are, we've got to pay attention to what we do. We've got to shift to green energy. We can't keep burning oil. There are those that say, and coal. There are those that say coal's on its way out regardless. There's nothing this administration can do to save it. I had a little thought flash through and it zipped out. It'll come back, and I'll bring it through for you again. Let me move on. I can usually keep my chain of thoughts going pretty good, but I think I got too much trying to come through, and I can only speak so fast. Here's one that hasn't gotten a lot of conversation in the United States. And for those of you that are aware that transiting Pluto in Capricorn is balsamic the U.S. natal Pluto in Capricorn, we're going to have a Pluto return in 2022 with Pluto at 27.5 degrees Capricorn. One of the things that's really been going on in the background as consensus consciousness has had a backlash with Pluto in Capricorn is wanting to have our own constitutional convention. And so with the U.S. Constitution, amendments are done on a national level through Article 5, and there's two ways you can do it. It takes a 2/3 support of both congressional congresses putting forth a bill and passing it into law, and then having it ratified by 2/3 of the states. Think of giving women the right to vote. We have made changes to our Constitution that way in the past, 27 times, doing it through Congress, and Congress passing an amendment and the states ratifying it. The second choice is untested. It's never been used. And this is called a convention of the states, or a constitutional convention. And this is where 2/3 of the states, and then with 50 states, the number's 34. 2/3 of the states have to pass a resolution that they want a convention. And then all the states will send representatives, and they'll vote on changing the Constitution by amendments directly through whoever they send. Well, as we have watched the conservative movement in the United States really go in and organize on a grassroots level statewide and take control of the gubernatorialships in 30-some states, I think it's 31 or 32, to come up with Republican majorities in the legislative chambers on a statewide level. 27 states have passed a resolution for a balanced budget amendment. In other words, they want a constitutional convention on one issue. The U.S. has got to balance its budget. I don't have enough time to go into that, but what it would do, it would say from here on out, the federal government cannot incur debt. It would serve it's a backhanded approach to gut social support systems and social infrastructure in the United States. And if you know anything about running governmental institutions, when you have recessions, when you have contraction of the money supply, that's where the government can bring money into the money supply, into circulation, and actually restart the citizenry and restart the GDP and move things out of recession into some degree of expanding again. So this is why it is so interesting to watch this grassroots uprising that has come since the 2016 political or presidential election here in the US, because we can shift this
energy. Basically, I'm not against a constitutional convention, but I, of course, want it from the liberal, progressive, or inclusive perspective. You know, I would love to see us abolish the Federal Reserve, because it's a private corporation and is run by private banks, and all, you know, they game the system at the expense of the average citizen. So in the US, with our Constitution, we can create a constitutional convention on a single issue or multiple issues. And so we can do it on the conservative side or the liberal side. Stay tuned. See how this catches steam throughout these Uranus, Biseptile, Pluto aspects, especially in the background of transiting Pluto balsamic, the US Pluto, and getting ready to have our first Pluto return. You know, and also with the Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto conjunctions that will happen in Capricorn, with Jupiter, Saturn, 0 Aquarius here in 2020. You know, these will mix through. Remember, the biseptiles are 2018 to 2021. So we're going to have all the way through Jupiter and Saturn balsamic to Pluto, transiting Pluto balsamic, US natal Pluto. We're going to have these biseptiles shifting and changing and bringing the potential for, again, realignment on an evolutionary path. Stay tuned. We'll see where it goes. Now, I better check time for you. I try to be a good timekeeper. Oh, I'm over a little bit. I only have a couple of slides left. I'll make it very quick. This is the U.S. Gemini rising chart. It's the chart that I have a tendency to use. And I drew it up with the outer bi-wheel of the North Node lunar eclipse that's going to happen on July 27th. And that's because the first of these biseptiles, and there's 7 of them, is going to happen July 26th. And so while it's not, you know, both Uranus and Pluto are active in the charts. Uranus is in orb of squaring the natal nodes of the U.S., while the U.S. is having a nodal axis return. The Mercury is going stationary retrograde while it is opposing the U.S. moon. And in mundane charts, the moon is the public. And the public is the court of public opinion, as you can sometimes loosely call the moon. And the moon's nodes having a lunar return, having a nodal return, having a lunar eclipse on top of it. There could be well, if you're following the United States, will the Mueller investigation, you know, bring out charges against Trump for Russian collusion, or most likely obstruction of justice, or even another possibility, laundering money with the Russians? Pluto, here transiting when it's biseptile, is going to be opposing the midpoint of the U.S. Sun, Mercury. So there can still be a lot more of that polarity of opinion, but how will the broader collective in the United States work its way through it? Donald Trump chart, same lunar eclipse, same first biseptile. You know, the biggest thing is the fact that we're going to have transiting Pluto getting closer and closer to opposing his natal Saturn, which is the Lord of Karma, the great timekeeper. I called it his soul reckoning with previous actions. Mercury stationary retrograde still on his Mars. The lunar eclipse is active on that natal Pluto, as well as the transiting nodes. And this could be one very confused soul, and who knows what can be flying out of his mouth when we get to the middle of July. Just some quick little examples for you. Briefly, I did a talk earlier for EA Zoom on Uranus making waxing semi-squares to Neptune. There's 5 of those going on.
You can research that webinar. It's a free one as well if you haven't seen it. And so Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto are very active in the background on collective levels. How will you choose to participate? Here is one of my most favorite posters. Violence is the method by which the ruthless few can subdue the passive many. Nonviolence is a means by which the active many can overcome the ruthless few. It's a quote from Jonathan Schell. Here's the slide of how you find us on evolutionaryastrology.net. And here's the final slide for you one more time with all of the 7 aspects. I am happy to answer questions for however long it is available to do so.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Great, Kim Marie. Thank you. That was amazing. Thank you so much. So shall we leave the slides up or shall we go back to the attendee panel?
I am happy either way. What would you prefer me to do?
How about we stop share so that we can see the attendees and they can ask some questions if they have any. So
Sure.
go ahead with any questions. Just give us a moment to think of what we want to say.
Well, and if I may, I think, Linda, I think you scheduled me to do Uranus, Biseptile, Pluto in a 2-part series.
Yes.
And so whatever we don't finish, or if anybody doesn't think of a question right away, they're welcome to contact me or you. And as we move into part 2, we can definitely continue to address things. What I had thought I would try and do part 2 is maybe look at it from a little more individuated level, perhaps with a personal chart. I'll do part 3, part 4, whatever you want, because this aspect is just, it's going to be just as big.
Yeah.
And nobody, it's not in the calendars.
Well, it's so interesting to learn that it's going to be just as big as the squares. I had no idea.
It is. And when you look at that cycle of phases and aspects and you see the harmonics of 7 is that element of fate, what appears to be fate, to help realign you on your path. It gives hope. So, sorry, I'll get too excited. Questions,
okay.
anybody?
Let's see if anyone has any questions. Wanda, go ahead.
Hi, Kim. You know me, I'm full of questions.
That's fine, sweetie.
You may be addressing this in a later, later session, but I was kind of wondering how would this aspect tune those of us who have a Uranus-Pluto aspect in our charts?
Oh, it's just going to activate it, sweetie. Whatever your natal Uranus-Pluto aspect is, the biseptiles transiting are going to realign you on whatever that evolutionary intent is between Uranus and Pluto via that natal aspect. And yes, what we can do in a future Zoom meeting is perhaps have a chart or 2 in which we have some actual example of it.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Do you have another question, honey?
I think that's it for now.
Okay.
Okay, it looks like we may need to wind down now. So thank you so much, Kim Marie. Looking forward to your next meeting. And
thank you.
Thank you from all of us. Would you all please thank Kim Marie Weimer?
Thanks, Kim.
Thanks, Kim. Looking forward to the next one, too.
See you.
Brilliant.
Thank you all.
See you, Kim Marie. Bye.
All righty. Bye-bye.